While Australia has been lucky enough to have never suffered the assassination of a current Prime Minister, the prestigious and immensely important occupation is far from bloodless. 3 Prime Ministers have died in office in Australia's history, with 2 of them being rather uncontroversial natural deaths. The last and most recent one, however, was far from that. I'm, of course, talking about the mysterious disappearance of Harold Holt, which has since been etched into Australian folklore, and will be the subject of this video. But with that intro out of the way, let's get straight into the famous disappearance of Australia's Prime Minister and what ultimately led up to it. Harold Holt became the Prime Minister of Australia in January 1966, following the retirement of Sir Robert Menzies. He was a career politician, entering Parliament at the young age of 27 and becoming a government minister at the age of 31. As with the previous Prime Minister, Sir Robert Menzies, Holt refused a security detail upon taking office, considering it unnecessary and potentially alienating to the general public. This stance would ultimately change, however, after 2 incidents in mid-1966, the first being a window in his office being shattered by a sniper, and the second being the assassination attempt on Arthur Calwell, the leader of the opposition. After these 2 occurrences, Holt grudgingly accepted a single bodyguard for his official duties, but refused any protection while on holiday, regarding it as a violation of his privacy. His wife Zara later suggested that this was so he could hide his extramarital affairs, however. Holt was a keen outdoorsman and had beach houses at Portsea, Victoria, and Bingle Bay, Queensland. He was first introduced to spearfishing in 1954, and it soon became his preferred vacation activity. Holt is known to have worn a wetsuit so he could spearfish year-round rather than be contained to the summer months. Holt preferred either skin diving or snorkeling, as he found air tanks burdensome and inauthentic. Once he had speared a fish, he would unzip his suit and place it inside, allowing him to continue fishing for however long he liked. According to his companions, Holt had incredible powers of endurance underwater, and sometimes kept himself amused during parliamentary debates by seeing how long he could hold his breath. Despite his endurance and ability to tread water for long periods of time, he was not a strong surface swimmer. During his time in office, several of Holt's friends confronted him about the dangers of the hobby he loved so much, including his press secretary, Tony Eggleton, to whom Holt responded, "Look, Tony, what are the odds of a Prime Minister being drowned or taken by a shark?" An almost comical quote given what eventually happened. It appears his friends' concerns weren't for naught, as Holt might have expected, as on the 20th of May 1967, Holt had a close call while diving at Cheviot Beach on the Mornington Peninsula, where he became distressed and called for help. Pulled ashore by his diving companions, he remained conscious but turned purple and vomited a large amount of seawater. Holt attributed this incident to a leaking snorkel and supposedly remarked, "That's the closest I've ever been to drowning in my life." A few months later, on the 5th of August, which was also his 59th birthday, he was spearfishing at Dunk Island on the Great Barrier Reef. He spent 25 minutes chasing a large coral trout, but eventually had to abandon the pursuit due to extreme shortness of breath. Holt had been in reasonably good health throughout his life, although he had a family history of premature death. His father had died at the age of 59, and his older brother at the age of 57. In September 1967, Holt began treatment for a painful shoulder injury that he had originally suffered playing footy in his youth, that being Australian football, for which he was prescribed painkillers and twice-weekly physiotherapy. A few days before his death, he had been briefly examined by his personal physician, Marcus Faunce, who advised him to avoid overexerting himself and to cut back on swimming and tennis. Some people have speculated that Holt's judgment on the weekend of his death had been clouded by his medication in combination with work-related tiredness and stress. Morphine was named as the drug that he had been prescribed, although no direct evidence indicated that he had taken any on the day of his death. Speaking of which, just like any other day, Holt rose early on the ultimate day of his disappearance, Sunday the 17th of December 1967. After breakfast, he called his wife before driving to the local general shop mid-morning, where he bought insect repellent, peanuts, and the weekend newspapers. One of the headlines in The Australian was "PM advised to swim less," which detailed the latest advice from Holt's doctor, but whether or not Holt bought or read that particular paper is unknown. On returning home from the shop, Holt made plans for the rest of the day, which included a visit to Point Nepean, a barbecue lunch, and an afternoon spearfishing trip. At 11:15 a.m., he and 4 others set out for Point Nepean, where they hoped to watch solo circumnavigator Alec Rose pass through the Rip into Port Phillip Bay. He was accompanied by Marjorie Gillespie, her daughter Vina, and 2 family friends of the Gillespies, Martin Simpson and Alan Stewart. It was a hot day, and Rose's yacht was barely visible, so the group only stayed a short while before leaving. On the drive back to his home in Portsea, Holt suggested that the group stop at Cheviot Beach for a swim at about 12:15 p.m. as he wanted to cool down and work up an appetite before lunch. Holt knew the area well and had swum there many times, even being where he suffered that initial near drowning. He also managed to salvage a porthole from the SS Cheviot in 1960, the shipwreck that had given the beach its name. Holt did not hesitate in entering the water, despite a large swell and visible currents and eddies. Alan Stewart was the only other swimmer, as the others considered it unsafe. Stewart stayed close to shore, and even in the shallows felt a strong undertow. However, Holt swam into deeper water and was dragged out to the sea. The others called out to him, but he did not raise his arms or cry for help. He soon slipped under the waves and out of sight in a manner which Marjorie Gillespie described as like a leaf being taken out, so quick and final. Following Holt's disappearance, Stewart drove to the nearby Officer Cadet School Portsea, an Australian Army training facility. The school was virtually deserted, as most personnel were on annual leave, but the Victoria Police were contacted and unsurprisingly initiated what would become one of the largest search operations in Australian history. The search for the Prime Minister's body began at 1:30 p.m. when 3 amateur divers entered the water but found it too rough. They were soon joined by helicopters, watercraft, police divers, and 2 naval diving teams. Not much progress was made, however, due to the rough conditions and limited equipment available. By the end of the day, more than 190 personnel were involved, with operations being based out of the Officer Cadet School. This number would eventually increase to a massive 340. The search resumed just before 5 a.m. on the 18th of December, despite strong wind, heavy seas, and occasional rain. Working in shifts, 50 divers focused on the rock pools and ledges near where Holt had last been sighted. Indicative of how bad the conditions were, the divers were forced to free dive to minimize injury as they were continuously being driven against the nearby cliff face. Due to a change in tide, the search was suspended yet again at 8 a.m. and did not resume until mid-afternoon. The following day's operations were again hampered by the weather. Conditions would finally improve on Wednesday the 20th of December, but by the following day, most personnel were being withdrawn. The search for Holt's body was officially called off on the 5th of January 1968, although it had been gradually scaled back to the point where it consisted of only a daily beach control come the end of that period. Lieutenant Commander Phil Hawke, who led the HMAS Lonsdale diving team, later stated that any chance of finding the Prime Minister was lost by the Sunday night. Due to Holt's body never being found, his disappearance, unsurprisingly, has been the root of many theories and conspiracy theories. According to his biographer, Tom Frame, there could never realistically be much doubt that Harold Holt drowned. He was simply one of the number of ordinary Australians who drown each year through poor judgment or bad luck. It seems likely that Holt simply misjudged his own swimming ability and the roughness of the conditions and was simply overcome by exhaustion. Alternatively, it is certainly possible that he may have suffered a heart attack, been struck by driftwood, which for those who don't know is simply just wood that washes ashore onto beaches or rivers, stung by a jellyfish, or my personal favourite theory, attacked by a shark. If the latter were to be true, he likely would have been taken by a great white or maybe a bronze whaler, as those are the only 2 real dangerous sharks commonly found in Victorian waters. The Victoria Police launched a formal investigation into Holt's disappearance the day after it occurred. The resulting police report was released on the 5th of January 1968, the same day the search for his body was officially called off, but did not record any definitive findings due to a lack of evidence, only strengthening the conspiracy theories that would spawn in the wake of his disappearance. Senior pathologist James McNamara was consulted about what might have happened to Holt's body and suggested that it may have been trapped by kelp and then consumed by sea creatures, specifically sharks and crayfish. The federal government declined to conduct its own inquiry as the disappearance was considered uncontroversial and his family did not want one. Until 1985, the state law did not allow for the Victorian Coroner's Court to conduct an inquest without the presence of a body. In August 2003, State Coroner Graham Johnston announced that his office had compiled a list of 103 cold cases involving suspected drownings where bodies were never recovered. By November 2004, 82 cases had been deemed suitable for coronial inquests, including that of Holt. Johnston would open a formal inquest in August 2005 and handed down his findings early in the following month. He concluded that Mr. Holt took an unnecessary risk and drowned in rough water off Cheviot Beach, and that there was nothing significant in any of the material gathered that would indicate anything other than drowning occurred. Johnston also criticised the decision to not hold a government inquiry at the time of the disappearance, suggesting that it may have avoided the development of some of the unsubstantiated rumours and unusual theories, which we will get into now. Some have advanced the view that Holt's death was not accidental, as it initially seemed, but rather that he chose to end his own life. Supporters of this theory claim that Holt was depressed and mentally unstable and killed himself because he thought his political career was in jeopardy. Those who reject it point to his cheerful and happy personality as well as his commitment to his family. Rejectors of this theory also point to the fact that suicides in front of witnesses are unusual. In regards to the more out there theories, many claim that his death was actually a cover-up at the highest level of government. A 1968 story in the Sunday Observer claimed that Holt had been assassinated by the US Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, supposedly because he had intended to pull Australia out of Vietnam, which sounds absolutely insane to me, but each to their own. Suggestions were also made that Holt had been killed by the North Vietnamese after being incapacitated by a nerve agent, or that he had faked his own death to be with a lover. In 1983, British journalist Anthony Gray published The Prime Minister Was a Spy, in which he claimed that Holt was a lifelong spy for the People's Republic of China. According to Gray, Holt faked his own death to defect to China and was collected by frogmen who dragged him to a waiting submarine, which is an even crazier theory than the assassination one, in my opinion. Reviewers unsurprisingly noted multiple factual errors in the book, not least that it was physically impossible for a submarine to be positioned so close to the shore. His wife and grandson have both denied the theories, with Zara also observing that her husband didn't even like Chinese food, which is just a hilarious statement to me. Like, no, he couldn't have possibly been a Chinese spy because he didn't even like Chinese food. Due to the nature of his death, and being the only leader of Australia, or really any country to the best of my knowledge, to die in such a fashion, Holt's death has entered Australian folklore, and is frequently the subject of black humour, or dark humour. His name has even become a byword for any sudden or unexplained disappearance, with the phrase, "to do a Harold Holt," which I've never personally heard, I don't think, but maybe some of my fellow Aussies have, so let me know in the comments. Holt's death also actually spawned a storyline in the Australian soap opera Neighbours, which I didn't know about despite watching the show a lot when I was younger. Something that I find particularly funny is that in 1988, rugby league commentator Jack Gibson, ex-coach of the Cronulla Sutherland Sharks, said, "Waiting for Cronulla to win a grand final is like leaving a porch light on for Harold Holt," which I don't think you'd be able to get away with today, despite being quite a funny joke, in my opinion. Apparently over the following 30 years, opposition fans taunted Cronulla by waving posters of Holt's face and dressing up in wetsuits before the club eventually won its first premiership in 2016. Alright, well, I think that's where I'm going to end this video, as it is getting quite long now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. Also, I'm always looking for more video suggestions, so if you had any, I'd appreciate it if you left them in the comments. But with all that being said, as always, I hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next one.